Hi everyone, my name is Rachael and I'm a licensed clinical social worker in Urbana, Illinois, which is about 2 hours south of Chicago. I am the Associate Director of Programs at Siebel Center for Design, and I'm also the founder and creator of Social Workers Who Design. So I'm thrilled that you clicked on this workshop and that you are interested in human-centered design and design thinking. My original title for this was Design Thinking for Social Workers, Integrating Human-Centered Design in Social Work Education. And this sounded like a perfect topic to really talk about when I submitted this as a proposal back in November. But a lot has changed in the past several months. And so I'd really like to propose that we focus a bit more on equity-centered and justice-involved design thinking for social workers, skills that are desperately needed now and for the future of social work. One of the things I am often asked in this work is, why am I interested in human-centered design? Why am I interested in design thinking? How do I find that relevant and important? And why should it be included in any aspect of social work, whether it's practice, the research that we do, or the education that we are doing with students? And so I have found that at some point in our social work careers, 100% of us have encountered problems that need to be solved, crises that require collaboration, and dilemmas that call for creativity. And I'm going to really speak from that perspective and from that lens today. So a little bit of background. I got my MSW at the School of Social Work at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where I currently also work at the university. And I was a student focused on macro practice from 2008 to 2010. And while I was a student, I became involved with a local design nonprofit called the Champaign-Urbana Design Org, where I was a volunteer, and I worked with the organization to partner them with a local nonprofit to do a redesign for that nonprofit. So creating a website, creating a new logo, creating the marketing and collateral materials that small nonprofits often need, but rarely have the talent or the expertise, the time, or the money to invest in. I got more and more involved with Kudo and became a board member, where I really got to use my strengths as a macro social worker in this much more creative element. And when I was doing my field placement and then graduating after I got my MSW, I spent about 6.5 years at the VA in my hometown. And between doing my field placement there, being a patient advocate, working actually on construction projects with engineering service, and then that led me to work with the Healthcare for Homeless Veterans program. And in almost every single one of these roles, I had an opportunity to apply human-centered design and design thinking principles, especially through a systems thinking lens. This was a huge initiative that was going on with Veterans Affairs at the time under a President Obama administration, with significant resources and spotlight on ending veteran homelessness. And so it was the perfect opportunity to use and to apply human-centered principles in this kind of innovative programming and setting. I ended up leaving the VA because I needed to be able to work closer to home. I had a small child who was getting ready to start school, and I saw this great opportunity to become the assistant dean for student affairs at my alma mater at the School of Social Work. And during my time there, I focused a lot on recruitment, admissions, student affairs, academic affairs, and I had my hands in a lot of different pots. And I talked with a lot of different students, and I talked with a lot of fellow alumni who just talked about what are some of the skills that students need both now and in the future, especially in social work practice. And I really started finding some opportunities where some elements of human-centered design were really parallel to skills that skills of the future that were needed for both, I think, now current social workers, but also those who would soon be coming into the workforce with us. During this time, I was really getting much more interested in design and design work and design research. And I kind of took a risk and decided to apply for the MFA program at the University of Illinois, and was accepted and started this past fall, in fall of 2019. And so a lot of my focus is really looking at design for responsible innovation And I'm using my social work practice and social work experience to really infuse some elements of trauma-informed practices in the design research process. So this is early stage work, but a perfect opportunity where I see the expertise and experience of a social worker can really heavily influence the work that is happening in design research, and human-centered design. I also, I mentioned at the beginning that I'm the Associate Director of Programs at Siebel Center for Design. And I want to just mention something about Siebel Center because this is a new campus-wide initiative. There are a number of design centers and design programs that are happening around the United States. The D School at Stanford is a very famous one. MIT's lab is also a very famous one. And there are kind of smaller but growing ones that are happening around the country, but also around the world. And Siebel Center for Design, what makes it, I think, especially unique is that we are a 50,000 person land grant institution that has this charge of delivering high caliber, high rigor education. And the center is completely and heavily focused on human-centered design and design thinking across the entire university system. So not just in the classroom, but what can we do and how can we utilize the principles of human-centered design to improve and change processes for the greater good. So it's a newer initiative. It's only 2 years young, and it's something to really something to behold, and something very special to be a social worker that is part of this effort. More about that here in a little bit. So what is design thinking? Well, I think in the social work sphere, many of these phrases have probably come up in our work, especially when I think about macro social work and macro practice. A lot of these phrases like social entrepreneurship, social innovation, systems thinking, design innovation, strategic innovation really come up a lot, or at least they've come up quite a bit for me over the past decade. But there's something that is especially unique about design thinking. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper into this. So there are really different kinds of thinking. I think when you look at engineer thinking, like engineers are trying to solve their way forward. In business thinking, there's a constant emphasis on optimizing your way forward. With research thinking, you're trying to analyze your way forward. Lean thinking, you definitely want to streamline your way forward. Design thinking, you're building your way forward. So it could be a tangible thing that you're building, or it could be a program that you're building. And I think in social work thinking, which is something that I'm coining here, we are helping our way forward. So when we look at human-centered design, I think there are elements that are crucial to the process. It's important for us to not just understand what people are saying and what they're doing, which is the observation part of the process, but it's also very important to have a deeper understanding and recognition of what people are thinking and what they're feeling. And this is the empathy part of the process. So these things are very natural to what social workers do, whether we're working with individual clients, groups, systems, organizations, policy, administration, what have you. All of these aspects are constantly in the forefront of what we're doing. We just might not categorize them or characterize them in these kinds of terms. But the combination of this observation and empathy is really the crux of what human-centered design is. Another way to talk about this is to look at, when we are looking at problems or opportunities to actually approach with a different way of thinking, we often look at them as being concrete to abstract. And so when we observe situations, we immediately want to go straight to a solution. But with the human-centered design process, it looks actually a bit more like an arc. And so through those observations, we're actually trying to get a better understanding of the insights, the patterns, and the themes. And this is going to lead us to a synthesis process. And once we go through the synthesis process, it's going to give us a sense of what kind of frameworks can we build, multiple frameworks can we build to potentially approach a possible solution. What these frameworks are, they are then going to lead us to very defined and refined principles and opportunities, which is really just our strategy. And the whole point of this process is to be iterative. So we want to do this multiple times. We may go back and forth through different stages of this process. We may come up with frameworks from various insights and patterns and themes, and realized that we might need to actually talk to more people or spend more time with some of the people that we originally spoke to. So design thinking, another element of design thinking, is that it's rooted in empathy, and it's heavily focused on curiosity and asking why, which often leads to the inspiration phase of the work. The how, which is really encourages us to think critically, to think creatively, and to think practically. And then also the what, which is the ideation, the prototyping, the implementation, and the starting all over again. So 10 plus years in the making, this is what this journey has been for me. And I want to mention an article from the late Burton Cohen, who was a faculty member in Pennsylvania. And he wrote this beautiful article about 10 years ago about a design-based practice, a new perspective for social work. And when this was brought to my attention a few years ago, it really struck me. It felt like an academic scholarly article that actually validated some of the hunches that I was having related to these intersections between human-centered design and social work practice. And I really felt like the focus on the design-based practice within social work was something that really spoke to me as a macro practicing social worker, but also to some of the types of things that have been brought to my attention in terms of what we could or what we should be doing, how things ought to be, which is highlighted here in his abstract. So throughout all of my social work that I have done over the past decade, I really kept seeing these patterns and these frameworks, which seem to confirm that social workers cannot do their work without all kinds of design. Think about it. Everything that we do is something that has been designed. So whether it's been an intervention, a program, an approach, a model of how to address a systemic human need, all of these things have been designed. And so they have an opportunity to be thought of and thought through in a redesigned, co-designed type of approach. So this really led me to think a little bit deeper into this, and where was I seeing maybe some of these parallels between design and social work. So designers are designing for people with different needs, abilities, and aspirations. And social workers are helping people with different needs, abilities, and aspirations. And so when you look at the combination of these two, it just seems like we are operating on parallel train tracks, but do not have that opportunity to cross over and potentially work more closely together. So we share common values: empathy, equity, community, social justice, impact. And so I want to share a few examples. So think of this in the context of, if you are a social worker that is in private practice, if you are a social worker who works for a large organization, if you're one who works in a non-traditional entity like a corporate setting, or you're working in policy and administration at a macro level, think about the opportunities that both current social work students and future social work students could possibly have if they have some experience and some application of these different skill sets. So I'm going to talk about a few. So one is called Creative Reaction Lab. This is a design firm that is focused on equity-centered, community-based design. They started back in 2014, and the founder just felt that it was crucial to host a 24-hour hackathon in response to the police brutality that was happening in Ferguson, Missouri. And that is how Creative Reaction Lab was born. They have a social worker on their team who leads a lot of their community programming. And the type of work that they do is so synonymous to community-based participatory research. It is literally the very close sibling of work that we often do as social workers in communities around the world. Greater Good Studio is another great example. This is a studio similar to Creative Reaction Lab, but based in Chicago, Illinois. All of their work is focused on some kind of equity-centered, human-centered design lens. They have done amazing work with Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, with leading nonprofits, both in Chicago, in the state of Illinois, in the Midwest, and around the country. I encourage any of you to look into them and to read some of the things that they have published around issues of power, issues of oppression in the practice of design. There is language that they utilize that is so similar to language that we learn and that we practice in our own work, that I immediately saw this this kinship between studios like Greater Good and like Creative Reaction Lab and social work practice. Another example is Design Impact. This is a similar design firm organization that is in Ohio in the United States. And the reason why I want to include Design Impact is because they work with dozens, if not hundreds, of different nonprofits, primarily in Ohio, but also around the country. And all of these nonprofits are likely agencies where social workers are doing their field placements or are considering to work there maybe after they graduate. I think the opportunity for social workers to be involved in some of the work that Design Impact is actually doing is actually pretty high. And for them to have that opportunity and that exposure while they're in their field placement is something that would give them some lifelong training and expertise in the human-centered design process. Another entity and I think area of work that's worth mentioning is Social Work Futures. So this is work that is really exploring how social workers can increase their impact through a futures framework. This is work that's really being led, I think, around the country and even like possibly around the world by Laura Neeson, faculty member in Portland, Oregon. One of the elements that she talks about within Social Work Futures is design-based practices. And so I think this is something for social workers to not only get involved in Social Work Futures work and to kind of understand what does the future of social work look like. This is absolutely fascinating work. When I started following Laura and reading much more about her approach to Social Work Futures, I was immediately hooked. I think it's worth mentioning social workers who design. This is my own effort where I am slowly but surely wanting to highlight social workers who are doing anything in this design world. So it does not have to be a product that you've designed or a graphic that you've designed. I really see social workers as designers. Now, it might not be designers in the tried and true traditional sense, but social workers are designing and creating things every single day. And I think if we use some of this language, it will position us in an opportunity to be able to talk much more proudly and more succinctly about our work, especially macro practice. So let's take a pause here before we transition to a mini workshop adventure that is going to look much different than if we were in person, but this will give you a taste and a sense of some of the things that some of the ways that social workers can approach this. So a mini workshop. I really want us to look at the interests, skills, and needs of the people we are working with. My approach to human-centered design and equity-based human-centered design is to really make sure that we are doing a co-creation, a co-design opportunity and effort. And so it's really utilizing the with, not for approach. So remember what I said earlier about it's important to pay attention to what people are saying and doing, which is the observation part of the process, but also to really deeply understand and pay attention to what people are thinking and what they're feeling. And this is often the inferred part. And I feel like social workers are so perfectly trained and so perfectly suited to do both of these pieces because we do it already. We are already doing this in our practice. But it's important when you are doing some of these human-centered design practices and exercising some of these methods that we really tap into the creative parts of our brain, which I think often are latent because of the type of training that we receive. So for those who may have some natural tendencies to creative endeavors, this will be easy for you. But for those who don't identify with ever being creative, or you don't think that you have a creative bone in your body, I want you to just let go of that potential label and that stigma and embrace that a little bit as we walk through this process. The other thing is empathy is a really often overused word. And I feel like this visual really gives just a very short and subtle explanation of what empathy is. It's really trying to feel and understand and walk in someone else's shoes. And this is something that this is a process, and this is a thing that for social workers that is deeply rooted in trust and is deeply rooted in rapport building. So in the human-centered design process, again, it's another element that I feel social workers are perfectly suited and able to do. So if you have that opportunity, grab some Post-its, find a Sharpie or a pen, and I want you to write as many ideas as possible. And so I'll give you a specific prompt to sort of wrap your head around this. And if we were all together face to face, we'd be doing this in a very rapid producing way. I'll show you some images that give you a sense of what this looks like. And so let's say we're focusing on issues of homelessness and the individuals we are working with. I want you to think about, what do they need? What are their interests? And what skills do they have? So needs, interests, and skills. Now, if we wrote several of these, we would have a ton of these on the wall, and we would be putting up, what is it, some of the things that individuals who are homeless or housing insecure, what do they need? You can see in a previous workshop that I've done that, they need affordable childcare, they need affordable housing, they need smartphones, they need access to food, they need support, they need clothes, they need shelter, they might need spiritual development, they need beneficial financial support, and a ton of other things that this group came up with. When we look at some of the other things that they might need, we're looking at who are some of the potential partners. So we're looking at housing and urban development, schools, law enforcement, policymakers, families, churches. Someone mentioned the VA, Veterans Affairs, employers, landlords, developers, municipalities. So you can see like the wide spectrum and array of ideas that can very quickly be generated by even just a small group of people. Another example here are other entities that could be helpful and part of this process. And so if we were together, we would be coming up with as many ideas as possible, individual ideas on Post-its, putting them up on a wall in the grouping and in the categories that they're in. And you can see in this next image, like what that kind of color matrix might look like. And the next part of this process is to really identify, to think about any of these, like a cluster of these things. So like one from each category, and to come up with a how might we statement. Now, how might we statements it's one of the many design methods of the human-centered design process when you are trying to creatively problem solve or approach a situation. And so a how might we statement is taking into consideration an action for what and for who are the stakeholders, and then what could possibly be changed. Now, we might want to look at some visuals for inspiration. And so I have this up here as something that could help us with framing a potential how might we statement. This one in particular is from the National Alliance to End Homelessness, and it's focused on like the 5 keys to effective emergency shelter. So it's addressing the housing first approach, safe and appropriate diversion, immediate and low barrier access, housing focused rapid exit services, and data to measure performance. So, I'm not going to pull from every single aspect of this, but when I saw this, I thought, this is a great visual to actually maybe shed some inspiration, especially since we're doing this in a virtual setting. So here's a how might we statement that I would maybe come up with. How might we use the housing first approach to partner with local landlords for women and children who are housing insecure in order to safely place them in permanent supportive housing? Now, this is a very specific, targeted subpopulation within those who are housing insecure. But it's really important to be as specific as possible. Like you can go very, very big, or you could go very, very narrow with how might we statements. And it's important to generate as many of these as possible. They can be extremely lofty and unattainable, and they can also be very, very micro and really address some very specific things that we know that we might be actively working on. So when you are doing this process, let's say we had an array of each cluster of these. So the needs, the interests, and the skills. We would have a grouping of each of these. I would ask everyone to pick one from each. And the best thing to do when you're doing something that is iterative and that is highly creative is just to pick them as quickly as possible and then come back as a group and see where are there potentially some themes from what the group all pulled together. Where is there opportunity to maybe build a specific program? The whole point is to not have something that is going to be like this absolutely perfect, foolproof thing, but it's to actually go through the process, to go through it quickly, and to trust a little bit of your gut and to iterate on that, especially with a smaller team. This is such a great, quick exercise that is a very good exposure for I think any individual, but especially social workers. I've done this a handful of times, and the amount of activity that comes from this initial hesitation is really remarkable to see. So you can see some examples of where participants in previous workshops have pulled from and thrown up some different Post-its up on a board. And here, this is one team that was really trying to narrow in some of their focus to come up with a specific program off of just coming up with a new program and a new initiative for young social workers. Here's another example. You can see where the grouping is really color-coded. And I was doing this with another colleague, and we were looking at client needs, who are the potential collaborators, and what's the environment. So there are different ways to sort of play around with some of the language, depending on the context of the group of people that you're working with. I really want to end this workshop and this presentation by really stating a few provocations. One of the things that is very much embraced within human-centered design and design thinking and in design research are to maybe throw out some occasional provocations to really get people thinking and wondering about where we could maybe go with some of this work. So I have a few here. So as we look to the future of social work as a practice, as a discipline, as social work education around the world, I'm going to use some how might we questions. So how might we use equity-centered design to empower social work students and strengthen social work as a profession? How might we develop creative and imaginative ways to integrate equity-centered design and social work education in our field placements, in our training, and in our practice? How might we both amplify and build value in both social work and design? I really think that this is a critical one that I am really starting to explore much more deeply. How might we create new knowledge and understanding in both social work and design? And how might we create opportunities for social workers and designers to co-design in equity-centered ways? So thank you. Again, my name is Rachael. I'm a social worker living in Illinois in the US. And please look me up, please reach out if you're interested in talking more about human-centered design, design thinking, equity-centered design, and how we can integrate this in social work, education, and practice. Please reach out. My email is dietekus2@illinois.edu. You can also see my two websites there, socialworkerswho.design and designthinkingforsocialworkers.com. And you can also find me on Instagram. So thank you so much for listening, for participating, and enjoy the rest of this conference. Thank you so much.